an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Vorkosigan Saga, Book 1, Shards of Honor, Chapters 4 through 6. In these chapters, there's a lot that happens, but you know that all I want to talk about is the fact that we had this woman propose to after meeting this guy like a week ago, and she seems down. You know what? I'm not even mad about it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Sofia for commissioning this episode. What's up, Sofia? Sofia also commissioned the last one. So lovely. Appreciate you, Sofia. You guys, a few things that I want to talk about off the top. So, this may surprise some of you, but when you commission me to cover a book series, I almost always leave it to Candace to do all of the creating of the banner image, the booking, all of that. And I never even see the cover for like up until the day I read it for the first time. And even then, when I downloaded this book on Kindle, it came with this weird version of the cover where it's a couple of like string puppets. It's not a good cover, and I don't really get what they're doing with that. But I then had to create a banner image of my own because Candace was away from her desk and I needed to upload the episode. So I went and looked for the cover of the book. And imagine my surprise at seeing the cover art and realizing, like, hold on a second, what is this? Because it looks like an 80s sort of romance novel. And not really a romance, but you get what I'm saying. And when I looked it up and found out that this book was written in 1986, I was flabbergasted. I had no idea. And that is a really high compliment, I think. Like, I'm sure, I'm barely into it, so I'm sure that there are going to be things that crop up that I'm like, what are we doing? But as of right now, this has felt so modern and so fresh to me. It's blowing my mind how old this book is. I'm just really, really impressed. And also, I took it for granted as I was reading it that, like, at first, I started reading assuming it was a male author because I just default to thinking something's a male author because that is misogyny and patriarchy in my brain. But as I got further in, I was like, oh, okay, no, this has got the flavor of a lady. This is a woman who wrote this. And it makes a little bit more sense to me. Her name is Lois McMaster-Bujold. I hope I'm saying her name right. It makes sense to me with this being as excellent as it seems to be so far, but that I had not even heard of it, that it's a woman author from the 80s. Like, of course it is. Of course it is. If she had been a dude, I bet this series would be way, way more, like, huge. And I'm not trying to say that nobody has heard of it. I hadn't heard of it. But when I announced that I was covering it, a lot of people got very excited. So it's clearly, like, popular. But you know what I'm saying. Like, it feels like the kind of thing that, and I may be wrong about this, but that got popular in a later era when we were more willing to give women writers a chance. And probably should have been more popular at the time it was written. And again, I haven't looked into anything about the sales of this book and how popular it was at time because I don't want to inadvertently spoil myself, like God knows what I would stumble across by accident. But I just really wanted to share with you all my shock at that, and how the fact that this had a different cover when I got it. Like, I had a completely different impression of what this was going to be. The cover almost made it look like it was going to be some sort of like gritty political, or like I'm thinking like almost like a John Grisham-esque type of procedural almost, because the cover that I have is very geometric and minimalist. And I think that it's really remarkable how much a cover affects the way that you perceive things, because when I saw the cover it had originally had, whole different vibe. And I think that probably they were right to change the cover, because you have a certain impression from that I don't know how accurate it is. But I don't feel like the cover they went with was the greatest choice. Maybe I'll be singing a different tune by the time I get to the end of this book. So anyway, all right, let us begin. Vorkosigan woke around 3 hours before dawn and made her lie down to snatch a couple hours sleep. And he asks her to help drain his leg so that he can bandage it up. And he tries to say it feels better, but when he stands, he like almost falls right on his face. And he takes this pill out from his emergency kit and swallows it. And I love this, Cordelia somewhat absently picked it up, found herself with no place to put it, and surreptitiously dropped it again. I really enjoy that, because like, she's like, don't litter. And then she's like, oh yeah, there's not really a trash can. I guess, okay, we're going to litter. You just put it in your pocket also, but it's fine. So he says, these things work great until they give out when you fall down like a marionette with the strings cut. I'm good for about 16 hours from now. Later on, there is a doctor who calls this stuff poison. But yeah, this is going to be something that's going to enable him to power through what's coming. So they come upon the cache, and he sees that they are camped in there. See that dark streak beside the long waterfall? That's the entrance. And he's looking through and he sees Kudelka. He's all right, but the thin man with him is Derobi, one of Radnov's spies. Remember his face. You'll need to know when to keep your head down. Cordelia wondered if Vorkosigan's air of enjoyment was an artifact of the stimulant or a primitive anticipation of the clash to come. His eyes seemed to gleam as he watched, counted, and calculated. No, I think that's just him, babes. Like, look, I don't know this man super well yet, but I really feel confident in that one. I would not doubt that the drug accentuates his excitement, but this for me feels innate. This is who this man is. Vicky says, I giggled when I noticed on this read-through that the pill that gets Aral up and going when he couldn't on his own is, quote, a little blue pill. What does that mean? Oh, Vicky, I don't know things. What is a little blue pill? Wait, is that what they call Viagra? Is that what it is? That would be funny. I didn't even think of that. I don't know if that's the thing, but that's what I have in my head for some reason. Okay, Vicky is confirming it is Viagra. Okay, cool. He hissed through his teeth, sounding a bit like one of the local carnivores himself. There's Radnov, by God. Wouldn't I like to get my hands on him? But this time I can take the ministry men to trial. I'd like to see them try to get one of their pets out from under a bona fide charge of mutiny. The High Command and the Council of Counts will be with me this time. No, Radnov, you're going to live and regret it. And I really enjoy this because I feel like the drug is probably just making him a little bit more loquacious than usual. Like, probably this would be all internal monologue if he weren't on this drug. And it's just kind of fun. So all of this has happened. They had left. This is, for Christ's sake, De Boer is such a pain in all of this. Like, I'm not holding it against the kid, but he really is just constantly an issue. So he was like collapsed and sleeping, and they just decide to leave him so that they can sort of scope things out. And when they go back, he's gone. And they're just like, oh, come on, fuck, where is he? And they start to wander and look for him. And finally, Vorkosigan is like, look, we just don't have time to search for him. I need to get command back. Once I do that, I'll send people out to find him, and it will be no problem. But if we don't get in there and get me back in command, we're not making it anyway. So let's just deal. And she is like, I don't like it, but he has a point, so let's do this. So he says, because she's like, well, why don't we just go up to them and be like, hey, I'm alive. And he's like, something's up here. There's a landing party. If you have to use a weapon, he hands her back her stunner. It had better be one you can handle. It still has a bit of charge, 1 or 2 shots. Keep your head down. This path runs between sentry points, and sooner or later, someone's going to come down it. So, he goes off and is on the other side of the path, and they wait for a man who steps in, a gray-haired man named Korobik. And this is a real... So, Vorkosigan steps out and is like, hey, what's up? And clearly expects this man to react positively. Sees this dude as an ally. But he doesn't react that way at all. Vorkosigan looked faintly puzzled, as if disappointed by the cool, controlled reception. I'm glad to know you're not superstitious. I should have known better than to think you dead until I'd seen you buried with a stake through your heart, said Gotchin, sadly ironic. What's wrong, Korobik? Asked Vorkosigan quietly. You're no minister's lickspittle. After these words, Gotchin brought the disruptor up to undisguised aim. Vorkosigan stood very still. No, he answered frankly. I thought the story Radnov told about you and the Bettins smelled, and I was going to make damn sure it went through a board of inquiry when we got home. But then I would have been in command. After being acting captain for 6 months, I'd be sure to be confirmed. What do you think the chances of command are at my age? 5%? 2? 0? They're not as bad as you think, said Vorkosigan quietly. There are some things coming up that very few people have heard about. More ships, more openings. The usual rumors. So you didn't believe I was dead? I was sure you were. I took over. Where did you put the sealed orders, by the way? We turned your cabin inside out looking for them. Vorkosigan smiled dryly and shook his head. I shall not increase your temptations. No matter. The day before yesterday, that psychopathic idiot Bothari came to see me in my cabin. He gave me the real story of what happened at the Bettins camp. Surprised the hell out of me. I'd have thought he'd be delighted at a chance to slit your throat. So we came back here to practice ground training. I was sure you'd turn up sooner or later. I expected you before this. I was delayed. Where's Bothari now? Solitary confinement. That's very bad for him. I take it you didn't spread the news of my narrow escape? Not even Radnov knows. He thinks Bothari gutted you. Smug, is he? Smug as a cat. I'd have taken great pleasure in wiping his face at the board if only you'd had the good grace to meet with an accident on your hike. And at this point, we have a very clear, gauging whether or not there's any way to come back from this. He's determining whether... If he were to side with Vorkosigan, Vorkosigan could possibly overlook the fact that he was willing to let him die in this fashion for his own gain. And there's a moment where he's weighing this, and Cordelia can see that this man is just barely crying. There's like tears in his eyes. And she's like, oh, that wouldn't be happening if he didn't intend to shoot him. So she uses her stunner and brings this guy down. And I was so delighted that she is this quick with it. She just believes her gut. And Gotchin goes down and just says, damn you, haven't you ever been outmaneuvered? I really enjoy that we're already hearing about how this man has a reputation for just being unkillable. It's delightful, frankly. And, you know, the Vorkosigan is like, well, if I'd been outmaneuvered, I would not be here. So no, that has not happened. You really did have trouble making up your mind, didn't you? And Cordelia is looking at him and is trying to take the measure of him. And they're deciding which way they're going to go. Cordelia stared at Gotchin, whom they had placed in the spot that had so effectively concealed her, wondering whether his directions marked a return to loyalty or a last-ditch effort to complete Vorkosigan's botched assassination. He stared back in puzzlement and hostility. North, she said reluctantly at last. She and Vorkosigan exchanged a look of understanding, and he nodded. Come on, then. So, the whole way that this goes, he is interpreting it as like, oh, okay. So, this dude was still going to try and kill me. And this results in her saying later on, like, well, he was given 2 chances to make it up to you and like be on your side after all, and he didn't take them. But eventually, Vorkosigan puts himself in this man's hands again and gives him a gun and turns his back and is just like, if you're going to do it, then fucking do it. Or else I'll get you on a trajectory and we'll get you promoted. I really enjoy the fact that he's giving this man another chance just because, and this is rare for me, I can be very brutal about characters. I don't, in person, it's going to be a whole different story because I have never actually killed anybody, but I am frequently the person on a TV show watching folks give a person a second chance or just be like, well, we can't kill him. We can't become like them. Frankly, there are times where I think killing somebody is the best option. Just to get them off the board, they are going to cause a lot more harm and chaos. And sometimes you just got to cope with the fact that you're going to have blood on your hands to keep other people safe, and that's just the reality of life. However, somebody like this who is so sort of on the fence is always really, really fascinating and also unpredictable sometimes because you won't know all the circumstances they're working with. So it adds a really fun plot element a lot, at least in my mind. Somebody that mostly you're pretty confident about their loyalty, but they may be talking to somebody that you don't know about. They may have been made offers. All kinds of things could play into that and make them a little bit more of a wild card. So I am interested in what's going to go on with this guy. So let's see. He says, the sentry post is at the top. Whoever's there will be able to scope us in a moment. Drop back here and cover me. If you hear firing, he paused. Use your initiative. So he calls out sentry report, and this is so great. Followed by the most, good God, it's the captain! Followed by the most honestly delighted laugh she'd heard in centuries. She leaned against a tree, suddenly weak. And just when was it that you stopped being afraid of him and started being afraid for him? And why is this new fear so much more gut-wrenching than the first? You don't seem to have come out ahead on the trade, have you? Oh, girls catching feelings. So he summons her out, and of course these guys react in a way, because she's wearing a Baton uniform. And he has to be like, she's my prisoner. He on parole, except for access to classified areas, she is to be extended every courtesy. She's armed, and a good thing, too. Vorkosigan did not enlarge on this, but went on to more urgent affairs. Oh my god, I love the part when somebody says, your funeral was splendid, you should have been there. Oh, bless him, Kudelka. Next time, perhaps, Vorkosigan grinned. Oh, I didn't mean it that way, sir. Lieutenant Radnov made the best speech. I'm sure he'd probably been working on it for months. Kudelka, a little quicker on the uptake than his companion, said, oh. Bless him. What a sweet little angel baby. So, Radnov, Dorobi, Sens, and Tafas are to be disarmed as quietly and cleanly as possible and placed under arrest on a charge of mutiny. There will be some others later. I don't want any communications with the General Vorkraft until they're under lock and key. I immediately, when he says, you guys handled those bad men, I was like, they are getting away. There is no doubt in my mind. And they do, but like, it just really, of course, if he's not there personally, it's going to go wrong. So they go inside, and I was really relieved that when he kept talking to Cordelia about, I just need to take command back, there was a part of me, you guys, that really was like worried that he was sort of deluding himself and that actually nobody really wanted him back. I was thinking that there was going to be a sort of the reaction that his first encounter, the energy that encounter had. I was afraid that was going to be the vibe all the way around. And I was very concerned when that's how it went with him, thinking like, this feels like a bad sign for the way things are going to go with everyone at large. I was so relieved when it turned out to not be the case. So they go on inside, and or not inside, but they're like crossing through toward the door. And this is when we fucking see DeBauer being basically like waterboarded. Vorkosigan sees it and just says, oh, hell, that's my prisoner. Hands off him. The Baryarans braced so fast, it looked like a spinal reflex. DeBauer, released, fell to his knees, still drawing breath in long sobs. DeBauer is a man with the worst luck I have ever heard. Like, one could say the best luck because he's still alive and he probably should have died with everything that happened to him. But Jesus Christ. Like, I just felt so bad for this fucking kid. That's... So anyone... Vorkosigan's like, okay, so what the fuck were you doing? And the man in charge, whose name is Buffa? I'm going to say Buffa because I don't like Buffa. That sounds weird. He's like, well, we thought the Baitons killed you and we were trying to question him and find out if there were more of them around. And he says he refuses to talk. I always thought Baitons were soft. And Vorkosigan is like, oh, Jesus Christ. He can't talk. He was hit with a disruptor. And even if he could, he didn't know anything. Cordelia yells out, you Baryarans are nothing but barbarians, scoundrels, and assassins. I thought Vorkosigan might have a moment of just like, I'm really mad that you embarrassed me in front of this girlfriend that I'm hoping to have soon. That he was going to like kind of clam up or get offended about it. And instead he just says, and fools, don't leave out fools. I loved this reaction. Is he all right? Seems to be, she admitted reluctantly, but he's pretty shaken up. Commander Naismith, I apologize for my men, said Vorkosigan formally and forcefully, so that no one there could mistake that their captain humbled himself before his prisoner because of them. So embarrassing. Oh, you guys. Don't click your heels at me, muttered Cordelia savagely for his ear alone. At his bleak look, she relented a little and said more loudly, "It was an error in interpretation." Her eye fell on Lieutenant Buffa attempting to make his considerable height appear to melt into the ground. Any blind man could have made it. Oh, hell, she added, for DeBauer's terror and distress were triggering another convulsion. Poor kid. So, at this point, Vorkosigan says, "Tafas, give your weapons to Kudelka." Tafas hesitated, glancing around, then slowly complied. "I didn't want any part of it, sir, but Lieutenant Radnov said it was too late." "You'll get a chance to speak for yourself later on." "What's going on?" asked the bewildered Buffa. "Have you seen Commander Gotchin, sir?" "I've given Commander Gotchin separate orders." I like it. "Ensign Kudelka, take my prisoner to the cave, see they're given proper food and whatever else Commander Naismith requires. Then see the shuttle is ready to go. We'll be leaving for the ship as soon as the other prisoners are secured." He avoided the word mutineers as though it were too strong, like blasphemy. She is bringing DeBauer to the doctor. And she's talking to Kudelka about what happened to Vorkosigan's leg. And she's trying to downplay it because she can sense that Vorkosigan is really trying to make it like it's no big deal. I'm fine, you know. It's quite terrible, actually. But he doesn't want anybody to know that. He's still running off that fucking weird drug. And Kudelka says, "I don't want to criticize the old man, but I don't know of anyone else who'd tell a political officer when he came on board to stay out of his sight if he wanted to live to the end of the voyage." Cordelia, making the second turning behind him in the halls of the cave, was jerked alert by her surroundings. Most peculiar, she thought. Vorkosigan misled me. The labyrinthine series of caverns was partly natural, but mostly carved out by plasma arc. So later on, she's like, "So what the fuck?" And he's like, "Yeah. Oh, you caught that, huh?" Because it turns out there's a lot more going on here than he was trying to lead her to believe. So Kudelka brings her in, and he explains about how these two are like under his protection, and they are supposed to get proper food, so don't try to poison them. Everyone's a critic. And the yeoman, which I don't remember if we actually get his name, but he gives her some food, and when he asks her how it is, and she says, "It's wonderful, it's delicious," he seems genuinely startled, like he never gets positive reinforcement, which is such a shame. You guys, I can't tell you how wild it is, the difference in the ways people respond to stuff. But positive reinforcement is the way to my heart. I absolutely thrive on it. You start getting negative reinforcement, and I'm just like, well, then fuck you. And I just clock out immediately. Like, it's pitiful in a way. But the fact that this kid is clearly in a culture where positive reinforcement is not something that's particularly encouraged, that's soul killing. I really felt bad for him. "Can I help you feed him?" Cordelia beamed upon him like the sun. "You certainly may." In less than an hour, she had learned the yeoman's name was Nilesa, there it is, heard most of his life's history, and been offered the complete, if severely limited, range of dainties a Barian field kit had to offer. The yeoman was evidently as starved for praise as his fellows were for home cooking, for he followed her around, racking his brain for small personal services to offer her. I just love the fact that she's got this little dude on his side. Getting in good with people who work in the kitchen is always a good idea. So Vorkosigan comes in, and I love that they're both like anything but oatmeal or blue cheese, please, thank you. he tells her about handing the guy his plasma arc and turning his back. And she's like, nice. I kind of thought maybe something like that would work, but I don't know if I would have had the nerve to do it. And I loved his response. Vorkosigan was like, yeah, I just really wanted to sit down. I'm tired. So if I were less tired, I don't know if I could have done it either, but it's fine. And he says, I'll give you the Admiral's quarters. It's called, although it's no different from the others. How was your food? Wonderful. That's not what most people say. Yeoman Niles has been most kind and thoughtful. Are we talking about the same man? I think he just needs a little appreciation for his work. You might try it. Vorkosigan, elbows on the table, propped his chin on his hands and smiled. I'll take it under advisement. So this is when we find out that Radnov and Dorobi both got away. And, oh yeah, that's right. But I thought she had brought DeBauer to the doctor first, but no, they go to the doctor here. There's an interesting conversation here about, like, do the boys know how they're being used, these soldiers? And he doesn't even try to argue that they're being used. He simply says, not a bit. They think they are the emperors of creation. I really appreciated that he doesn't get defensive. He seems, in a lot of ways, just as cynical about this as her, and not deluded about there's no, like, sort of nationalist streak in him, so far as I can see. It's much more about self-preservation than it is about, like, drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So she's realizing that, like, there's going to be several months of travel on the ship they're approaching together. And she's like, I guess I'll just try and see it as a vacation. They made their docking very cleanly, and the mob of hulking soldiers rose, gathered their equipment, and clattered out. Kudelka appeared at her elbow and informed her he was assigned as her guard, more likely, or babysitter. So they board the ship, and it's much more bare bones than the one that she had been in. The chief surgeon and a couple corpsmen whiled away their dusty hours doing inventory, and a lone soldier with a broken arm kicked his heels and kibitzing. DeBauer was examined by the doctor, whom Cordelia suspected was more expert at disruptor injuries than her own surgeon, and turned over the corpsman to be washed and bedded down. You're going to have another customer shortly. Your captain has a really filthy infection going on in his shin. It's gone systemic. Also, I don't know what those little blue pills are you fellows have in your med kits, but by what he said, the one he took this morning ought to be running out just about now. That damned poison, the doctor bitched. Sure, it's effective, but they could find something less wearing, not to mention the trouble we have hanging on to them. Cordelia suspected this last was the crux of the matter. I was not sure how to take it. If he says, like, the trouble we have hanging on to them, like, they get hooked on them? Is that what he said? What he means? Like, because at first when he said the trouble we have hanging on to them, I thought he meant the men who take them, like, that it shortens their lives potentially and that it makes it more difficult to save them. But then I was like, does he just mean that they're so addictive that people steal them, and so it makes trouble because they're dealing in, like, scarcity at that point? I wasn't really sure which way to interpret that. So there's this moment. She finally lays down, and there's a moment when she's thinking the cold whispering of doubt of whether she had done him, Vorkosigan, a service would be forever added to her inventory of night thoughts. I absolutely love that way of describing the things that just come up when you're trying to fall asleep that you can't ever quite let go of. Just putting it under the category of night thoughts. I absolutely immediately understood what that meant. It's just very, like, it's so simple, but I would never have phrased it that way. And that's going into my little inventory. I really, really like that. So, here comes Vorkosigan. He's fucked up. He has gone totally pale. He is sweating and shaking. And he's like saying, oh, I gotta do this. And one of his men is like, you already did that. Just clearly not on his shit at all. The surgeon has to like sort of get him caught up with the help of another one of the men because he keeps walking around. This moment. The surgeon turned back to his task to cut the taut trouser away from the swollen leg and swear under his breath at what he found beneath. Kudelka glanced over the surgeon's shoulder, then turned back to Cordelia with a false smile pinned over a green face. Cordelia nodded and reluctantly withdrew, leaving Vorkosigan in the hands of his professionals. Kudelka, seeming to enjoy his role as courier even though it had caused him to miss the show of his captain's return on board, led her off to the stores for clothing, disappeared with her stunner, and dutifully returned with it fully charged. It seemed to go against his grain. There's not a whole lot I could do with it anyway, she said, at the dubious look on his face. No, the old man said you were to have it. I'm not going to argue with him about prisoners. It's a sensitive subject with him. So I understand. I might point out, if it will help with your perspective, that our two governments are not at war, as far as I know, and that I am being unlawfully detained. Kudelka puzzled over this attempted readjustment of his point of view, then let it bounce harmlessly off his impermeable habit of thought. I swear to God, if that isn't so annoying, but yeah. I have got to speed things up a little bit here with my coverage. I'm going to try and figure out where to cut, because I want to spend some time on their conversation later, of course. This is when we meet Bothari. And I can't help but kind of like this guy. He has a very bass voice and is very laconic, but there's just something about him and the way that he responds totally honestly to her questions. I couldn't help kind of respect it. And the fact that he didn't go along with his plan, all of this, I like it. So let's see. She caught a glimpse of a Vorkosigan in a private chamber off the main ward, and he motioned her to enter. Commander Naismith, this is Lieutenant Commander Vorkalaner. I think I'm saying that right. I wanted to say Vorkaloner, and that just sounds really funny. So I think I'm going to say Vorkalaner. Captain Vorkosigan speaks highly of you, said Vorkalaner, making small talk. A slight frown from his captain at this opening escaped his notice. I love that. Just like, don't tell her that. I guess if we could only catch one Baton, you were the best choice. Vorkosigan winced. Cordelia gave him a slight shake of her head, signaling to let the gaffe pass. He shrugged and began tapping out something on his keyboard. That is so embarrassing, though. Well, I'm glad we caught somebody so valuable. Jesus, dude. To her face? You think it's a compliment? Jesus Christ. And he says that, because here it is. Why were you all so anxious to put us in a bottle anyway? Actually, I thought we might have been sent out here on guard duty as some kind of punishment. The remark caught Vorkosigan's humor. For your sins? Your cosmology is too egocentric, Aristide. There is so much contained in that sentence. I really like that, and I'm going to mull over that. Your detention was intended to be free of bloodshed. It would have been, too, but for that other little matter cropping up in the middle of it. It is a worthless apology for some, but it is the only truth I can offer you. The responsibility is no less mine for that, and I am sure someone in the high command will point out when this arrives. He smiled sourly and continued typing. And this is when she says, well, I can't say I'm sorry to have messed up their invasion plans. And Vorkalaner's like, What invasion? I love this so much. I thought he was going to be like all cagey about it. It seems like he genuinely had no idea what was going on. And this being said in front of him, Vorkosigan's like, fuck, yeah. The expansionists were waving the advantage of surprise and a big stick to beat the peace party, speaking as a private person. Well, I have not that right while in uniform. Let it go. What invasion? Probed Vorkosigan hopefully. With luck, none, answered Vorkosigan, allowing himself to be persuaded to partial frankness. One of those was enough for a lifetime. It was a great victory, sir, with very little loss of life. On our side. That's the idea, isn't it? It depends on whether you mean to stay or are just passing through. A very messy political legacy was left at Komar, not the sort of thing I care to leave in trust for the next generation. How did we get onto this subject? Who were they thinking of invading? Asked Cordelia doggedly. Why haven't I heard anything about it? Asked Vorkosigan. In an order that is classified information, and it is not being discussed below the level of the General Staff, the Central Committee of the two Councils, and the Emperor. That means this conversation is to go no farther. I've told her nothing she couldn't deduce for herself. As for myself, my opinion was requested on certain aspects. They didn't like it once they'd got it, but they did ask for it. And this is Cordelia being like, oh, okay. So that's why you were like shipped out of town. I got it. The whole development here, they get into a little bit further later. But she wanders around the ship. This is when she has the conversation. I hesitate to even call it that with Bothari. Asks, have you served with him a long time? Yes. And he doesn't expand on that at all. Do you like him? No. Why not? He's a Vor. Class conflict? I don't like Vors. I'm not a Vor. He stared through her glumly. You're like a Vor, ma'am. Unnerved, she gave up. Interesting. I don't really know what that means, but I'm interested. I'm open. It's clear he thinks of him as like better than most Vors from the way he's behaved, but yeah, I don't know. I love this. There's a video library, and the way that it is described here is, I'm assuming it's meant to be like on a television screen, like normal, but I kept picturing sort of the way that things in movies are portrayed when they are attempting to be futuristic. And I kept picturing like a screen that's sort of wrapped around her head in an almost virtual reality kind of style, But yeah, she's looking at this and is just like learning about the planet of Barayar, and it's just like, man, this place looks dope as hell. And there's actually like a real ocean, which apparently on Baton they just have she describes them as flat saline puddles that pass for lakes, which is really interesting. That the concept of like, well, what if a planet has water but it's all salt water and not exactly drinkable, and how much more of a pain in the ass that would be. Like, you've got water, yes, but you have to process it before, it's just interesting to think about that kind of factor. So he comes in to visit her, and she's looking at him and she's like, God damn, he cleans up real well. She is like feeling this man. And he comes in and he makes sure that the door is like propped open because he doesn't want to hear more of the kinds of comments that are clearly already circling. And he asks her what she was watching, and she tells him. And he's like, yeah, I used to go to the beaches with my mother in the summer. It's an upper class town, Bonsackler. My father was away mostly. Midsummer's Day was the old emperor's birthday, and they used to have the most fantastic fireworks. At least they seemed so to me at the time. The whole town would turn out on the esplanade, nobody even armed. No duels were permitted on the emperor's birthday, and I was allowed to run all over the place freely. The idea that, like, oh, it was such a great day because duels weren't allowed and I was allowed to roam around, like, this place sounds pretty grim in a lot of ways. And he says, when we return in view of the escape of your ship, there should be no reason to continue your internment. You should be free to present yourself at the Baton Embassy and go home if you wish. If I wish? She laughed a little uncertainly and sat back against her hard pillow. He was watching her face intently. His posture was a fair simulation of a man at his ease, but one boot was unconsciously tapping. His eye fell on it. He frowned, and it stopped. Why shouldn't I wish? I thought perhaps when we arrived on Barayar and you are free, you might consider staying. To visit? I'd like to see your planet. Not a visit. Permanently. As Lady Vorkosigan. His face brightened with a wry smile. I'm making a hash of this. I promise I'll never think of Batons as cowards again. I swear your customs take more bravery than the most suicidal of our boys' contest of skill. You don't deal in small change, do you? That's not what I want for you. With you. You should have the best. I'm hardly that, you must know by now, but at least I can offer you the best that I have. Dear Commander, am I too sudden by Baton standards? I've been waiting for days for the right opportunity, but there never seemed to be one. Days? How long have you been thinking along these lines? It first occurred to me when I saw you in the ravine. What, throwing up in the mud? He grinned at that, with great composure. By the time we finished burying your officer, I knew. She rubbed her lips. Anybody ever tell you you're a lunatic? Not in this context. You've confused me. Not offended you? No, of course not. He relaxed just slightly. You needn't say yes or no right now, of course. It will be months before we're home, but I didn't want you to think... It makes things awkward, your being a prisoner. I didn't want you to think I was offering you an insult. Not at all, she said faintly. There are other things I should tell you. It wouldn't be an easy life. I've been thinking since I met you that a career cleaning up after the failures of politics, as you phrased it, might not be the highest honor after all. Maybe I should be trying to prevent the failures at their source. It would be more dangerous than soldiering. Chances of betrayal, false charges, assassination, maybe exile, poverty, death. Evil compromises with men for little good result, and that not guaranteed. Not a good life. But if one had children, better me than them. You sure know how to show a girl a good time, she said helplessly, rubbing her chin and smiling. Oh my God, this dude. I love this so much. I love it. You guys, I was fully expecting this little attraction to just be this unspoken weirdness, that she was going to be much more like interested than he apparently was, but we would know he was. It was just that he was like hiding it more. I just had a very like tropey expectation. And like, honestly, if you think about it, so many romance novels do sort of start in this way where a woman gets like swept up in a thing, and then the man, like the pirate captain or whatever, they wind up in this sort of like that hate turns to love circumstance. And I really like the fact that we're not doing that here. They are not bickering. They actually work together quite well, almost right away. And they clearly have like similar personalities and values and goals in a lot of ways. Because honestly, the hate to love almost never works for me. I can't imagine, unless you've got a plot where one of those two characters is like completely hiding a lot of stuff from the other. A lot of the things that they originally do that she is supposed to then overlook later and be like, you know, oh, it's fine, I love him. I always am like, you're really just going to let that go? Because that was fucked up. So I much prefer the fact that it went the way that it went when they first met, that she was won over by him fairly quickly, and that he is the one to immediately be like, hey, I want to marry you. Can I just say that? Is it too soon? Just thought I would tell you. Just so unexpected. We're really like going at a good clip here. And also, I want to mention that, I had my fan cast of him, but I hadn't decided who I was imagining in my head for Cordelia. And I have landed on the woman who plays Dana Scully from The X-Files. I'm looking up her name right now. But yeah, she, I feel like, is just a really great, like, Gillian Anderson, that's her name. She is somebody who feels she's attractive, but in a way that feels very, like, grounded and real. There's nothing about her that looks like she's had a ton of plastic surgery, which is just a distinctive look that some people get after a point. So, and she always has this sort of no-nonsense intelligence about her. And the two of them, these actors, I feel like I really hit on something and that they could have great chemistry if they were put together. So if there's any director who's listening to this, you may want to check that out. Just for science. So he describes the way that you can get into politics in his universe, and he says imperial appointment, inheritance, and rising through the ranks. And when she's like, that's a weird design, he says it wasn't designed, it just grew. And she says maybe what you need is a constitutional convention, which is what comes up later because her people show up and they took a vote to go against her orders, which is hilarious. Like, that's very Baton from what I am understanding. And I think that my assessment that Baton sound like the Americans feels more and more correct here. But yeah, let's see. I aired they're bound to be suspicion I let it escape on purpose, your ship, to sabotage an adventure I deeply disapproved of. And he, just describes the fact that he was not into this, but when she's like, would you sabotage it if you could? And he's like, no, I do what I am told. Like, that's the point of, he says, that's what the syllable in front of my name means. While the question is still being debated, I'll continue to argue my case. I don't know what the syllable in front of his name, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, exactly how that is set up. Because obviously that is what, what's his name said? I can't remember his name, but you know who I'm talking about. And he tells her about the planned invasion, and apparently they found a wormhole jump over, they call it a jump to Escobar. And it seems like a lot of trading and everything is determined by these locations of holes that are used to travel quickly, because people engage in a lot of trade. And so if that gets fucked up, then yeah, it's going to be very valuable, these certain locations. And the way that they would be approaching this, she's like realizing that Beta Colony is right near the Escobar planet, I guess, one of their planets. And she's like, oh my God, then we would absolutely be drawn into this. Like, they're out of their minds. And he says, that's almost exactly what I said. Half our interstellar trade passes through Escobar and Tau Ceti 5 and Jackson's Hole. At the very least, I should think. The idea was to make it a quick operation and present the potential allies with a fait accompli. And I told them they were dreaming. I wish I'd kept my temper better. I could still be back there arguing against it. Instead, for all I know, the fleet is being readied even now, and further preparations go, the harder they will be to stop. So, yeah, this is when he's like realizing, because she's saying, if this does happen, we will be at war with each other. We will be like literally on opposite sides of this thing. And he's just like, fuck, that's true. So it ends with her being like, all right, I'm going to have to think about this, but it's not as easy as it looked at first. And he's like, yeah, that's true. Sorry. Vicky is saying the spoiled chat agreed. It's not a spoiler, just a clarification. The Vor prefix on a name equals members of the military caste / aristocracy. Okay. Was that mentioned earlier and I just missed it? But yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Oh my God, I'm out of time and I still have a chapter to cover, but it's okay because I feel like I can kind of go through a lot of this fairly quickly by just saying she's clearly extremely frustrated and sick of her own men. But this is so funny. So she's like wandering around because once again, she has been given like free reign to a point. And she gets a knock on her door and just says, enter. And this pair of soldiers comes in and she's just like, man, these two really look like shit. And then one of them is like, captain. And it turns out that they've like stolen uniforms. And the reason this all looks so strange is because these are her guys in incognito. There we go. Incognito. And they're thinking that she's going to be like, you're here. You saved me. But instead she's like, the fuck are you doing here? I gave you an order. And again, we get that we took a vote. And I just laughed. I laughed so much. That was so funny. She's just like, ugh, of course you did. Do you realize the Baryarans were planning to bring an invasion fleet through here to attack Escobar? If you had reached home and reported the planet's existence, their chance of surprise would have been destroyed. And again, they are just not willing to hear that they made a bad call. Steuben just keeps being like very proud of himself that he got a unanimous vote. He's very proud of himself that they got in here. Like everything about the way this is working out, he's refusing to hear that she is giving him news to point out how it's fucked. He just doesn't want to hear it. We got everything lined up, put on max boost, and cut everything we could think of that made electromagnetic noise. And she's like, we just followed them. We found these two Baryarans wandering in the woods, and she's like, Radnov and Dorobi? How did you know? Go on. Just go on. We took their uniforms, took their shuttle, and slid up to the general as neat as you please. Radnov and Dorobi, between them, knew all the countersigns. We made it to the brig. We thought you and DeBauer would be there. They're supposed to cut weapons when we make our break with the shuttle. I wouldn't count on that. No matter, said Steuben cheerfully. The Baryarans will be so busy fighting each other, we can walk right through. And they keep talking about the Butcher of Komar, and it's clear, like, she's just in such a different headspace now, and hearing them be like, I hope he dies. She's just having to restrain herself because she can't explain everything right now. So she says, I need you to follow orders this time and fucking stay here. The face was speaking. Vorkosigan got in, and Vorkalaner, I don't remember how I said I would say it. One by one, at least 2-minute intervals, unarmed, or all life support systems will be cut off throughout the ship. You have 15 minutes before we start letting in the vacuum. Have you patched in? Good. Better not waste time, Captain. His inflection made the rank a deadly insult. The face vanished, but the voice returned ghost-like over the loudspeaker system. Soldiers of Barayar, your captain has betrayed the Emperor and the Council of Ministers. Don't let him betray you too. Turn him over to the proper authority or political officer, or he will be forced to slay the innocent with the guilty. In 15 minutes we will cut life support. Cut that off, said Vorkosigan irritably. Can't, sir, said a technician. Bothari, more direct, unslung his plasma arc, and with a negligent gesture, fired from the ship. The speaker fired from the hip, sorry. The speaker exploded off the wall, and several men ducked the molten fragments. Vorkosigan tells him, thank you, Sergeant. Ah, God. I'm sure we'd all rather be clever than brave. If you can get your plan in place, Lieutenant St. Simon, so much the better. If he can't, I'm afraid we'll have to rush them. They're perfectly capable of killing everyone aboard and re-recording the log to prove anything they please. Between Derobi and Tafas, they have the technical know-how. I want volunteers, myself and Bothari, of course. So this is when Vorkalaner says, I don't know about this. They're going to be using disruptors. The first men through aren't going to stand a chance. Vorkosigan took a few seconds and stared him down. He dropped his eyes miserably. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Commander Vorkalaner is right, sir. An unexpected bass voice put in. It's Bothari, of course. The first place is mine, by right. I've earned it. It's mine. Their eyes met in a weird understanding. Very well, Sergeant, conceded Vorkosigan. You first, then me, then the rest as ordered. How is Bothari so badass? He's just, the vibe off him is just puzzling. I like it. Brooding. Interesting. So he says, stay put in your cabin until this is over to Cordelia, which is hilarious because he has to know that's not happening. And she sprints off to Steuben and, Lai? Is that how you say his name? Lay? Go to sick bay now. Pick up DeBauer and take him to the shuttle. When were Pete and Max supposed to report back if they couldn't find him? In 10 minutes. Thank God. When you get to the sickbay, tell the surgeon Captain Vorkosigan ordered you to bring DeBauer to me. Lai, you wait in the corridor. You'd never fool the surgeon. DeBauer can't talk. Don't act surprised by his condition. When you get the shuttle, wait. Let me see your chrono. And she's talking about a watch, and I kept thinking, is it a chrono? Would we say that, or would we still say watch? I always am interested in the way that words change in fiction, trying to decide whether I believe it, I feel like watch would just stick because it's shorter, but I'm going to have to kind of speed through this because I am just so overtime. But the way that this shakes out is that she has to find a way through and trick somebody into coming into this room and shutting the door so that she can talk to them one-on-one. Let's see, I'm trying to find this spot here. Okay. Let's see. I think Tafas called. I think there may be some kind of gas leak or something. Better close the door a second while I check. Want to get me out of this mess? What are you doing here? Trying to save a few lives. Don't worry, your friends over there are only stunned. And she says, Vorkosigan, if you do this, he'll expunge your record and give you a medal. And he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't know, whatever. He would like it, okay? And she says, you can tell him I pledged his word to you. And he's like, who are you to do that? And she says, Lady Vorkosigan, if we both live. And he's looking at her no, but he clearly believes her. So she gives him the stunner. What's the best approach? I can lure a couple more in here. The others are at the main entrance. We can rush them from behind if we're lucky. So, he opens the door again. It was a guess. Like, a couple guys come in here and help me drag these dudes out. They handle this whole thing. And it is really, like, interesting to me how well she is able to handle herself in this situation, because I had sort of assumed that she had very little combat training, but she keeps her head quite well. I'm impressed. I've got to do one more thing, Tafas. I've gotten you out of this, and I need a favor in return. How can I cut the control to the long-range plasma weapon so you can't get it back for an hour and a half? Why do you want to do that? Did the captain order it? No, your captain didn't order any of this, but he'll like it when he sees it, don't you think? Tafas, confused, agreed. Why? Why did you agree? She's just convincing, I feel like. I feel like she's just got a sort of energy of somebody who knows what the fuck they're talking about, and that's honestly 50% of the battle. So she says, I want a couple of minutes head start, then you can open the door and be a hero. I suggest you call first and warn them. Sergeant Bothari's in front. Right, thanks. She glanced up at the main entry hatch. About 3 meters away he is now. An uncrossable gulf. And then there's this line. So in the physics of the heart, distance is relative. It's time that's absolute. Which is such a deep kind of comment to be making at a moment like this. It felt weirdly out of place. I didn't hate it, but it did feel like bizarrely poetic for the moment. Do you know what I'm saying? Anyway, I love this moment. Last chance to leave a message for Vorkosigan. No. The absurdity of transmitting the words, I love you, through Tafas' mouth shook her with painful inward laughter. My compliments sounded rather swell-headed under the circumstances. My regards, too cold. As for the simplest of all, yes. She shook her head silently and smiled at the puzzled soldier, then ran back to the storeroom and scrambled up the ladder. She found herself nose to nose with a plasma arc held by Yeoman Nilesa. I've got some terms to carry back to your captain, she said glibly. They're a little screwy, but I think he'll like them. He totally believes her. Immediately is just like, oh, okay, yeah. Like, she just keeps catching everybody by surprise. She arrived at the shuttle hatch corridor. Dr. McIntyre stood guard, trying to appear grim and Barayaran. Is everybody here? He nodded, looking at her with delight. Pile in, let's go. She lay back in her seat, still gasping, lungs raw from her mad dash. Stupin joined her, seething, and stared in worry at her uncontrollable trembling. So this is another moment when he's like, I wish they would all just kill each other. Sorry, I'm jumping to the moment where here it is. Mac got his uniform. Mac, what's the name on your pocket? Kudelka? Cordelia bowed her head. Was he killed? He wasn't dead when we left, but he sure didn't look very healthy. What were you doing all that time aboard the General? Asked Steuben. Paying off a debt of honor? All right, be like that. I'll get the story later. I love that he's just like, that's bullshit. Cordelia leaned her forehead against the cold window and wept silently for her enemies. I really liked that line. Kudelka, you seemed cool. I hope you make it. He may be fine. Might be fine. This will probably be fine. But I'm really wondering, did she just send the message yes? Like, how is that going to work? I'm very excited. I love this. I'm having a great time. Just wanted to let you guys know that. So as far as I know, I think that I got an email today, and I'm sorry because I was only able to peruse it really briefly before getting started on some work. But the first 3 books have been commissioned, and then there's like a much longer series after that y'all have been sort of debating whether to commission because you don't know if I'll like them. as of right now, fully on board, pun intended, and feel like I would really like to keep doing this series. And I haven't looked into how long running it is, like how many years pass, or if it's even finished or what, but very, very enjoyable characters already. And the whole way that everybody's been drawn with some nuance, and it's just really interesting. All right, I'm so over time. I really have to wrap. But thank you guys again so much for listening and hanging out with me. Thank you very much to Sofia for commissioning this one. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.